On January 7, 1945, in Zonhoven, Belgium, British Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery stood before a room full of reporters. The Battle of the Bulge was still raging. Just 3 weeks earlier, German forces had launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes, smashing into thinly held American positions and creating chaos behind Allied lines. Montgomery arrived at a press conference in high spirits, confident, almost jovial. He had been given temporary command of American forces north of the German breakthrough, and he believed he had handled the crisis brilliantly. What he was about to say would ignite the worst crisis in Anglo-American relations during World War II, enraging American generals, triggering calls for his removal, and nearly fracturing the Allied coalition. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill would be forced into emergency political damage control to preserve the alliance. To understand how this moment came about, it is necessary to return to the opening of the Battle of the Bulge. On December 16, 1944, German forces launched a massive surprise attack through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg. 28 German divisions struck American units spread thin along the front, creating a deep and dangerous bulge in the Allied lines. The assault caught U.S. forces off guard. Some American units were overrun, while others fought desperate defensive actions as German columns advanced rapidly westward. Confusion and chaos spread throughout the region as the scale of the attack became clear. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower was forced to respond immediately. According to his memoir Crusade in Europe, Eisenhower made several critical decisions in the opening days of the battle. On December 20, 1944, he issued a command decision with far-reaching consequences. Montgomery was given temporary control of all Allied forces north of the German breakthrough, including the U.S. 1st and 9th Armies. Eisenhower's reasoning was purely practical. The German attack had severed communications between General Omar Bradley's headquarters in Luxembourg and the U.S. 1st Army in Belgium. Montgomery's 21st Army Group headquarters was geographically closer and better positioned to coordinate defensive operations. Eisenhower emphasized that this was a temporary tactical decision, not a judgment on American leadership. Montgomery, however, interpreted the decision very differently. According to multiple accounts, he believed he had been handed command because British leadership was needed to rescue an American failure. Over the next 2 weeks, Allied forces gradually contained the German offensive. American troops fought with extraordinary determination at Bastogne and other key locations, holding vital ground under brutal conditions. When the weather finally cleared, Allied air power devastated German supply lines and armored columns. By early January 1945, the German attack had been halted and pushed back. Montgomery's forces north of the Bulge played a role in the defense. British Third Corps was positioned to block any German breakthrough toward the north, and Montgomery coordinated defensive alignments and reserve deployments. However, the bulk of the fighting was done by American forces. Official casualty figures reflect this reality. Approximately 80,000 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured during the Battle of the Bulge, compared to roughly 1,400 British casualties. By January 7, 1945, the immediate crisis had passed. German forces were retreating, the Bulge were being eliminated, and Allied armies were preparing to resume their advance into Germany. It was at this moment that Montgomery chose to hold his press conference. Speaking at his headquarters in Zonhoven, he appeared relaxed and confident. The conference was carefully recorded by stenographers and widely reported in the press, leaving little doubt about what was said. Montgomery began by describing the German attack and the dangerous situation it had created. He explained that he had been given command of American forces north of the breakthrough and then stated, "As soon as I saw what was happening, I took certain steps myself to ensure that if the Germans got to the Maze, they would certainly not get over that river." He spoke of thinking ahead, widening the area in which the enemy would be forced to deploy, and then giving them battle. His language strongly suggested personal initiative and decisive leadership. He went further, describing how he had deployed British reserves and organized defensive positions. Then he made statements that caused lasting damage. Montgomery referred to the battle as one of the most interesting and tricky battles I've ever handled, framing it as an engagement he personally directed. He continued by saying, "The first thing I did was to get the battle area tidy, to clear up the mess. I regrouped the American and British forces and was then able to see what was happening. The implication that American forces had been disorganized and required British leadership to restore order was deeply insulting to U.S. commanders. Montgomery attempted to soften the impact by praising American soldiers, but the wording only worsened the situation. He remarked that the GIs make great fighting men given the proper leadership, implying that American troops were effective only when led correctly by him. He concluded by expressing admiration for American soldiers and saluting their bravery, stating that he never wanted to fight alongside better men. However, the damage had already been done. The press conference quickly became a public relations catastrophe. British newspapers ran headlines emphasizing Montgomery's role in halting the German offensive, portraying the battle as a triumph of British leadership. In the United States, reactions were immediate and furious. General Omar Bradley was outraged, later writing in his memoir Soldier's Story that Montgomery's remarks were a gross distortion of events. Bradley was so angered that he called Eisenhower and threatened to resign if Montgomery was not immediately removed from command of American forces. General George S. Patton, writing in his diary on January 8, recorded his own fury, accusing Montgomery of attempting to steal credit for an American victory and dismissing British contributions to the battle. American newspapers and military correspondents echoed these sentiments, condemning Montgomery's statement as arrogant and insulting. The controversy quickly escalated beyond the battlefield. According to official records, the U.S. War Department in Washington began receiving protests from members of Congress and from an outraged American public. The controversy quickly escalated beyond the battlefield. Politicians demanded that American forces be removed from British command immediately, placing General Dwight Eisenhower in an impossible position. According to his memoirs, Eisenhower found himself trapped between his British and American subordinates. Publicly contradicting Montgomery risked damaging relations with Britain, while remaining silent threatened open rebellion among American commanders. The unity of the Allied command hung in the balance. Within days, Prime Minister Winston Churchill learned of the crisis. Multiple accounts indicate that Churchill was informed that Montgomery's press conference had caused serious damage to Anglo-American relations. According to the diary of his Chief of Staff, Field Marshal Alan Brooke, Churchill was furious. He understood immediately that Britain's ability to win the war depended on American partnership, and that Montgomery's ego now threatened that relationship. Churchill concluded that the situation required personal and public intervention. On January 18, 1945, Churchill addressed the House of Commons. According to the official parliamentary record, his speech was carefully crafted to repair the damage caused by Montgomery. Churchill knew he had to be explicit in praising American forces and make unmistakably clear that the Battle of the Bulge had been fought and won primarily by the United States Army. He stated that while the battle was often described as Anglo-American, the reality was that American troops had done almost all the fighting and had suffered almost all the losses. Churchill reinforced this point with striking comparisons. He noted that American casualties were nearly equal to the combined losses of both sides at the Battle of Gettysburg. Only one British Army Corps had been engaged, while more than 30 American divisions had fought continuously for a month. These remarks, preserved in the parliamentary record, directly contradicted the impression left by Montgomery's press conference and made clear that the battle was fundamentally an American victory. He went even further by using precise numbers to eliminate any ambiguity. Churchill explained that American forces had engaged 30 to 40 men for every one engaged by the British and had suffered 60 to 80 casualties for every British loss. These statistics were deliberately chosen to emphasize the scale of American sacrifice and dismantle any suggestion that British leadership had saved the situation. Churchill then addressed Montgomery's role indirectly but unmistakably. He cautioned that care must be taken in telling Britain's proud tale not to claim an undue share of what was undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war and one that would be remembered as a famous American victory. This was a clear rebuke to Montgomery's claims without naming him, signaling that British assertions of credit had gone too far. Churchill also publicly defended General Eisenhower. He rejected any suggestion that the Supreme Commander had been overruled or that his judgment had been questioned. According to the parliamentary record, Churchill praised Eisenhower's leadership, stating that the battle had been conducted with great skill and determination. He concluded by warning against lending credence to mischief makers and reaffirmed his complete confidence in Eisenhower. The speech was widely reported in both Britain and the United States. Contemporary press coverage shows that American reactions were largely positive, and Churchill's words helped calm the immediate crisis. However, the damage caused by Montgomery's press conference was never fully repaired. American generals never entirely trusted him again. Omar Bradley later wrote that the incident convinced him Montgomery was not only arrogant but a danger to Allied unity. George Patton noted in his diary that Churchill had attempted to fix what Montgomery broke, but that Americans would not forget. Even Eisenhower, who worked hard to maintain cooperation, described the press conference as an unnecessary complication at a critical moment. Field Marshal Allen Brooke, Montgomery's superior and supporter, also criticized the episode, writing in his diary that Montgomery had made a serious mistake by claiming too much credit. Montgomery himself never fully accepted responsibility. In his memoirs published in 1958, he argued that his remarks had been misunderstood and that the controversy was exaggerated by overly sensitive Americans. This response revealed that he never fully grasped the damage his words had caused or why they were so offensive. Churchill's intervention on January 18, 1945, amounted to emergency diplomatic damage control. Historical analysis suggests that without his speech explicitly crediting American forces and supporting Eisenhower, the alliance might have suffered lasting harm. Churchill understood what Montgomery did not, that the Anglo-American relationship depended on mutual respect and that claims of British superiority over American leadership would poison that bond. Churchill's words, preserved in the parliamentary record, were a direct rebuke to Montgomery and a recognition of American sacrifice. By clearly stating the truth and assigning credit where it belonged, Churchill stabilized the alliance. The anger in America gradually subsided, and Allied unity held, though Montgomery remained a source of tension. Eisenhower even considered requesting his removal, a move prevented only by Churchill's personal intervention. In choosing the alliance over personal loyalty to his field marshal, Churchill demonstrated his political and diplomatic skill. His speech quietly but decisively placed responsibility where it belonged and preserved a coalition that Montgomery's ego had nearly damaged. The episode became a defining moment, revealing Montgomery's inability to restrain himself and Churchill's ability to manage crises through clarity, honesty, and statesmanship.